You're listening to the Deadly Uncle Podcast,
a safe space for deadly uncle conversations.
All right, next up we have Chief Cadmus Delorme.
Yeah, Chief Cadmus is all the way from Cowessess First Nation, and both Kurt and myself have familial ties to Cowessess First Nation, so it's our pleasure to have him today. Cadmus has a master's degree in public administration. He's got a bachelor of administration as well as a certificate in hospitality and tourism. He's got some great economic things going on the First Nation, and we're so proud to have him here today.
Blessed to have him.
I grew up on Cowessess First Nation. I'm 40 years old. I look young. That's that reserve water. I shower in every day on Cowessess. And I grew up just beside the band office on the upper hill. So on Cowessess, there's a lower and an upper hill. We're in the Coppell Valley. Our ancestors picked a beautiful location. And I graduated from Cowessess Community Education Center in 2000. I had one goal at the time, and it was to look like Eminem Marshall Mathers. And anybody that stalks me on social media, you'll find a picture of me trying to really look like Eminem Marshall Mathers. I grew up in a home with loving parents. We weren't wealthy rich. We were just love rich. I'm the youngest of 9 children. I'm the only child from my mom and dad. So at my house growing up, the joke was, honey, your kid and my kid are beating up our kid. And then I was our kid. So I had a very diverse, loving family. Today I'm talking to you from the house I grew up in. My wife and I raise our kids now, where my mom and dad raised me. So it's really nice to share a little bit of my past.
Isn't that amazing? You know, I just found out this year, I went and did a documentary on my reserve, George Gordon's First Nation, from my mom's side. And she was telling us that she was actually born right in my Cookham's house, right in the bathtub there. So really, really wild to know that the histories that, the history these homes have, today, on our reserves.
100%.
So what are the things? Sorry.
No, go for it.
I was wondering, like, you grew up on reserve. What were some of the things you could do when you were younger that kept you, like, what kind of athletics were you involved in? What was the school like? We both grew up in the city, so we don't really know what it was like, growing up on the reserve.
For sure. I lived in the city from the age of 19 to 33 when I was elected chief, and I moved back home. And I really see the how growing up on the reserve had its unique perspectives. You knew your neighbors very well, and your neighbors were a kilometer apart. Going to your neighbors wasn't just like walking down the street and going to a 7-Eleven for a Slurpee or something. No, you had to bike or walk, and it was quite the journey sometimes. But it was just like nothing. It was just like, I'm going to go see Emery down the road. And, it sounds like down the road, but it's like 2 kilometers away. And so you really appreciated your bike or your walk. And your visits were longer because you had to walk or drive all the way home after you were done. It really takes a community to raise a child. You knew everybody. You knew where everybody lived. If I remember running out of gas in my second vehicle. I was 16 years old, and we were going to the gas station, and I was like, I'll go check on Dennis. Telling my friend I was with, I'll just go check on Dennis. And I knew he had a Rottweiler, because when you're on the reserve, you know whose dogs are what. And Dennis's Rottweiler chased me all the way back to my car, and Dennis come out just laughing. He's an elder, eh? And still to this day, he makes the best joke about how fast I ran back to my car. And the sports was it wasn't just Cowessess. We're adjacent. There's Zagame, Cowessess, Kakawishtown, Ochapowace. And so we amalgamated our sports. And I remember playing on Pee-wee Bantam hockey teams with the 4 nations. And today we use that friendship from our hockey to unite now in more politics and bigger adult focused areas. And then lastly, the local towns, it was very Indian versus towns. Like, I'm not going to shy away from that. Like, it was, but it wasn't always bad things. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like when we would go, we'd always play soccer. Of course, you didn't have to pick teams because you were either on the Indian team or the white team. And so, we would play our sports like that. But it was after the games, like we would go hang out, and it was fun. And we would go to, when you got into the party stages or the weekend stuff when you were teenagers, we would go to a house party at a farm by the nation, and then sometimes they would venture out to the reserve. I think we had our little stigma once in a while, but just growing up on the reserve was, I found myself very appreciative of a Slurpee when I got to the city, or a Zellers, or a Walmart, because on the reserve you just got what you have in the fridge, and that was the best part.
Yeah, no. I can imagine that. So, what is there much for ceremonies and for tradition on Cowses? Were you involved? Is your family involved in any of that? And what's your experience with tradition?
When it comes to ceremonies, we first got to understand what we inherited. Our ancestors, foundational was prayer. Prayer was everything to our ancestors. Because of colonization, it is kind of a hit and miss today, and some have some bad experiences. Some just don't know where to start. Some know it's in our history, but they don't know if it's them. It's kind of political at times too. If you really get into it a little bit. But growing up, my parents both attended residential schools and were not really into the ceremonies. Respected it, but were not really into it. When I was 12 years old, my mom and dad dropped me off at a rain dance in Zagame on a Wednesday and picked me up on Sunday. I had no clue what a rain dance was. I learned so much in those days I was there. We got the center tree. I was in charge of keeping the sweetgrass going around the center tree when it was there. I was the helper all weekend, and one of the best experiences I ever had. I don't think we should do that to our kids today. I'm not promoting that to discourage them off, but my parents did. And I always had a respect for ceremonies. I knew what my parents were doing. They were just dropping me off with people who knew. And
Mm.
so, when I was 18, my mom got sick. She had something wrong with her spine. And at that time, my dad and mom had a relative that was very ceremonial and said, someone has to sacrifice in your family. And what that means is to fast. And so at 18, I fasted for my mom, and my best friend at the time, Rai Lara, we were like best friends growing up on the reserve. He fasted with me. And so it really allowed me to understand ceremony. So today, to really answer your question, ceremony is in communities. It is in First Nations, but it's not like a personal invite. Don't wait for your personal invite. My
Mm.
parents knew that their upbringing was different, but they really encouraged me to welcome it in for myself. So today, my kids and my wife and I, we attend ceremonies like on Cowses. There are 3 sweat lodges, and they're all family run. They're not community sweat lodges, but these
Uh,
family runs, they're for the community. Like, if you were ever to
mhm.
come to Cowses and say you want to go to a sweat, I'll just tell you, there's one tonight, there's one in 2 days, there's one on Saturday. Which one would you like to go to? And we're very encouraging and helping in the protocol too, because we know sometimes people may not know the protocol.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and that's exactly my parents' experience and our experience as well.
Yeah.
Kind of growing up, like I just realized, like because of growing up in Treaty 7 area, I was exposed to the Blackfoot teachings and way of being up in this area. So I didn't really grow up too much in Edmonton. I was back and forth as a kid, but I got a little bit of those teachings from the Treaty 7. So learning it
Mhm.
and I'm still learning. I'm still learning. I just found out that one of our ceremonies is our from my uncle George, who also is a powwow singer of gray buffalo. So yeah, just learning in our older ages, growing up in the city, we're trying to experience that for ourselves for sure.
Nice. It's a
Yeah.
lifelong journey.
For sure.
And you mentioned the other reserves. Are you related to anybody on, say, the other three reserves? I'm not familiar with your background that much, Cadmus.
Absolutely. So my father is Bruce Delorme. His father was Leo Delorme, and my great grandfather was Ambrose Delorme. So that's my lineage in Cowsis, and then the Leroy family with that. My grandma, my dad's mom was a Leroy. My mother's from Ochapowace. My mother is a Bear Isaac from Ochapowace. Her grandmother is a Lewison from Kakawishtahow. And I have a few X's on Sakame, so I'm related to all four in the four nations here. So,
Well, I was really interested when we came to the urban dinner. You guys had all the ancestry stuff put up on
yes.
the wall there, and that kind of started a journey for me to going into this stuff because Dino Leroy got in touch with me. He was doing some of the ancestry stuff, and he sent me like an ancestry chart of my own. And I don't know if you're aware of my great grandmother Madeline O'Soup or Madeline Acus, her story.
Mm-hmm.
So she was adopted onto the reserve in like around the turn of the century, and she was non-indigenous, but she was adopted as a baby and raised, traditionally on Cowsis with the O'Soups, and then married my great grandfather Mushin Paul. So through all this DNA stuff, they were able to locate her birth parents through ancestry, and I've been able to trace that Irish lineage right back to the 1700s. And the wild thing about it is one of my ancestors was born in Monaghan, Ireland, and I'm going to Monaghan in 5 days to perform. So it's like it all started at that Cowsis dinner. It kind of sparked my thing into this because we always there was always oral history in our family about Coca Madeline and where she came from, and all this ancestry stuff is actually, it's like verified all that oral history that we had. So it's really cool, and it was kind of sparked by what I experienced at the Cowsis thing there, where I was looking at all these family names, and I'm like, I'd like to figure out my dad's grandmother's line because that was unknown to us before, but now I've been able to fill in all those blanks. So thanks for that. That was actually interesting. I'm glad that the nation is doing that for people to see how they're related to each other, and because it's really important to know where you came from, I think, to understand what's coming next, right?
100%. And thanks for sharing that. And you did that between your guys' amazing songs you were sharing with us. So that's really good. Being a indigenous male, like, we're three males here, it doesn't matter if you're on reserve, off reserve, if you've never been to the reserve, if you've always lived on a reserve, each of us share that, we don't really know our history. Like that's just standard. And, it's a reality check. It's not I don't think it's something to dwell on. But, once you start getting into your history, or, maybe our fathers did something, maybe our fathers weren't there, maybe our fathers were very loving. Like, we all have different backgrounds. But the more we get to learn our lineage and like our actual bloodline, it really allows us to understand more of what we inherited and not take it so personal sometimes. Because, it's already tough being a male in this country, especially an indigenous male. And but I'm really happy you got to experience that, Trent, because I was one that I had a father who was very close to me, but he wasn't really close with his father and never really talked about his grandpa. So my own male lineage, I can only go back really as far as my father. And then my uncles played a little role as well, but I come from a family where men don't share their feelings. It's all humor and just a little bit of tough love here and there. So even for my boys, I am it's tough for me personally to try and show emotions, but I recognize that today.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and I think it's important for Indigenous men to be able to share their feelings and hug their children. I was telling Trent, and I've told a few other people, myself too. I never knew how to hug anybody until I was about 28 years old. Like, and hug in a family way, like a real true loving hug, and it's just the small things that I think that we forget about, as a society. So I just wanted to ask you, how did you get into the position of being chief, and why is that important to you, and what's been the biggest change in your life since you've been in this leadership position?
Hmm. I grew up on Cowes First Nation, and I grew up where my father was an elected official, not a chief, but an elected counselor. And when you didn't have the cell phones and you only had the landlines, I would hear my dad getting phone calls in the evenings and weekends, and I would attend meetings with him. I was just a smaller guy, and I used to sit there and watch, and I would play my part. And I used to go visit with him at homes when he'd go around visiting at homes. And so my dad taught me a lot about what a counselor slash potential chief would be. I got an undergrad degree in business administration from First Nations University of Canada, and then I went and got my master's in public policy, public administration from the Johnson Shiama School of Public Policy. And I knew I wanted to be a chief at that time. And somebody said, "Why don't you run for counselor first?" And I was like, "No, I feel like I'm a chief." I was like, the tone starts at the top. And, I ran and I got elected. I got elected in 2016 with a very high popular vote. I experienced a lot during that first term, and I re-ran for a second term. And I didn't get as much as the popular vote as the first term, because when you're a chief, you got to make decisions for the children and children yet unborn. And sometimes some people want you to make decisions for short-term benefit and not long-term gain. And I'm an elected official where I'm always thinking long-term. Like this is what you call delayed gratification. And sometimes politicians don't like that, because you're not going to feel the benefits of your change for sometimes a generation, sometimes a couple years. And so, my biggest learning is you see the people differently from a chief's chair. Growing up, the families, the Adjoucoutes, the Laras, the Disherleys, the Redwoods, the Tanners, the Sparviers. And, I grew up here. I grew up with the kids my age. I know them from school. But when you're a chief, you manage poverty. You manage physical, emotional, mental poverty. And, you have a budget, and it's not, money doesn't grow on trees. Like, you gotta always make some tough decisions, because when you manage poverty, that means you kind of don't have resources. You work with the council. They're the decision makers. I'm not the decision maker as a chief. People think that, you're the president. You're the man. You get to make the decisions. No, you have to convince 8 councillors to vote in favor constantly. And it's a good democratic system. And so and then lastly, you become numb to the poverty after a while. Like, as a chief, you attend the funerals, the wakes. You get there when there's not so much good times going on, and it's just your duty. You're there to drive hope for your people. And I'm enjoying the journey.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I also know that you guys have a Tim Hortons that you're a part of. That's amazing. One of the things that I've always talked about, which would be cool, little idea I'll throw out there for somebody maybe in the future here. It would be really cool at a powwow. Those big buses that they have when they're working on Tim Hortons, and the bus parks there, and people can come up and still do their drive through. Wouldn't that be cool to have a bus like that drives to powwows and parks there, and it's like a real Tim Hortons thing? Just little.
What if you had dancer drive through? You're just in the arbor, just handing out coffee and tea there, and They won't even have to leave the yard. Instead of drive-through cars, you just have drive-through intertribals. Maybe that's something that could be.
Everybody loves their Timmies,
dancing and then you can have the real tiny tots.
Espresso, you'll
Awesome.
know when the fancy dancers come out. There'll be espresso being handed out.
We'll change it to the Timbit dance.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And I also just wanted to say that I seen I think it's Cowses that's throwing on the men's group in Regina. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but if you do, I would love to know more about that and why that's important and how that all started.
Yeah, thank you. Cowses is revamping child welfare reform. And it's not just about the child, it's about the vertical lineage of the child, mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, uncle, auntie. And, we have women's groups, which are needed. The most toughest person to be in this country is a female Indigenous person. That there's no question there.
Mm-hmm.
And, parents sometimes just need to be retaught how to be a parent. And I don't mean that in a bad way. That's just, we've been through a lot as Indigenous people. And so, we were like, well, what are we doing for the men? What are we doing to just bring men together? And so on the reserve, we've had a men's group for a while. Now we're starting to move into the urban settings. Regina is a huge population for Cowses First Nation. We have more people that live in Regina than in the community of Cowses. So we are expanding. We do virtual. So, we try and do them online as well. And it's really tough, especially virtually when you're trying to vent or share a little bit and you don't know who's on listening, or when you're in a room with other men, right away you put up that shield, because there's 3 shields each of us carry. That outside shield that everybody sees, and that's that smile you always have on your face. That second sphere is just your closest friends and family see. And that third sphere nobody ever sees. And that's the one sometimes where that depression or that sadness or that loneliness really kicks in. And when we have our men's groups and our men's circles, we try at least get to that second sphere so you could share a little bit and make sure that, understand you're not alone on this journey.
That's amazing. And I totally agree with you. That's one of the hardest things that we were talking about is how do you get a bunch of men in the same room to talk? That was one of the difficult things. And we thought, you know what, let's start a podcast and let's shine the light on Indigenous men. Let's have people that can, tune in through video, through audio, have it all open for people to, be a part of, because you're right. There has been a lack of programming for Indigenous men, and being a performing artist and going to, all these post-secondary graduations where I'm invited to perform. I've seen what it is, with Indigenous women. There'll be 45 of them, graduating with post-secondary compared to about 15, 20 men. So there is a huge landslide in that. And so I think it's important for us as Indigenous men to create those spaces for each other, and shine the light on each other, because there's a lot of amazing Indigenous. We have 20 men that are on this first season that are just doing amazing things, and they're not all famous. They don't all have big, huge positions either. Some of them are just regular, youth workers or good dads, those type of things. So it's just, it's shining the light on those people. And then also, the programs that we see that are happening, we want to be able to share that with the communities, and that's why we're doing this podcast. So yeah, it's just amazing to hear your journey as well.
You were go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say there's a lot of deadly uncles out there.
Oh, there is. We've met a few of them. I was just gonna talk a little bit about, you were talking about revamping the child welfare system for Cowses. Cowses has the largest population in Treaty 4. Am I correct? Okay, correct. So you have, and then the majority of those people live off reserves. So I can see how you say you're managing poverty, right? That's got to be tough with having, all your people spread out.
Mhm.
In the child welfare system, like you say, you're working with vertically with families. Is there any kind of programs where like we have like off reserve housing? Um, I used to run a program here in Edmonton. Sorry, my brain is like rolling. I'm trying to
Mhm.
get where I get to my question here. I worked for a program called Morning Fire Protector. So in Edmonton, what was it was people experiencing homelessness. It was people and families that they all put in a building together, and they had workers there, like older auntie style workers that were there to work with the people and just help them with that transition. A lot of the people were people that came off reserve and that were struggling to get used to living in the city. Is that a program that Calcis has or would like
Mhm.
consider? Because that's what I think, like from my experience working frontline in the city with Indigenous people, that was a really successful program for people that were having that culture shock when they first moved to the city. And to have
Mhm.
those cultural supports, auntie kind of grandmother supports there for those families was really an important thing for them to transition living into the cities. And I was just wondering if we had anything like that for Cowsis.
Mhm. No, good question. First off, the population. Cowsis is the biggest population in Treaty Four, and Gordon's is actually right behind us. We're 4,320 people from Cowsis, and people ask why we're so big, and I always say it's because we're sexy and we know it. That's why we're such a big First Nation. But to your very important question, Trent, about supporting the family. I'm going to get a little technical here in child welfare reform, just for a little bit. So there's
Yeah.
two approaches to child welfare. There's prevention and there's protection. Protection is where the parents and the child need direct intervention, like actual. I hate to say the word, but we all know it is called apprehension and stuff like that. We try resist that at all costs, and for the best interest of the child, sometimes that has to happen. But prevention means many things. It's how do you gain the family to have parity with everybody else in that city or that community? Like, how do you make sure everybody's similar outcomes? And so we are starting more locally. We have what you call Sacred Wolf Lodge, where if a family is in prevention, we ask them, and it's not getting better. If the family just has a lot of intergenerational trauma, we will ask them if they would like to stay for 3 months in Sacred Wolf Lodge. So mom, dad, kids, and we train grandmothers to go and live with them, so they become their kokums, their grandmothers, and they go there in shifts, and they just reteach them how supper is, how you clean up after supper, how you have a talking circle before bed, how you help each other in the morning. And we've been graduating families from Sacred Wolf Lodge very successfully lately. It's a new model, and so we are now looking to expand it. But to just throw it out there, it's tough to do it in cities, especially farther away from houses, because a lot of our ideas and thoughts start at home and then branch out from there. If you have ideas or suggestions, if your nation is doing child welfare reform, today it's called Bill C-92, but it's really, you just get to assert your own jurisdiction, as we always should have had. This is where those ideas need to come in. Like, we need to make sure this is happening in as much places as possible. The challenge is the money may be there, but it's the resources to get it action oriented and
Mhm.
real is going to be the challenge.
Yeah, no, that's the ideas are always there, I guess, but creating a staff, a building, making that whole thing is definitely a challenge within itself, and it kind of brings me to my next question. People are starting to talk about having a place in every major city for Indigenous people to have wakes, to have ceremonies, to be able to pray almost like a church or like a mosque that other non-Indigenous people have to pray, and having these spaces inside of our city for people that may have passed away, they have a lot of friends or family that are in that city that can't make it out into the land to go to funerals. So
Mhm.
a lot of people have been talking about creating these spaces for indigenous peoples inside of every major city across Turtle Island. And I just wanted to know your opinion on that, and whether you think it's important or not.
Absolutely. I'll start. I'm going to separate your question into two. I'll talk about the gathering places in urban settings for times of mourning. Maybe it could be a wake or a funeral. It's a tough go. Like in the community, you get the hall for free. At no cost, and the chief and council and the community all come together. Food is brought, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful moment, and a very sad time as well. But it just shows how the community will put aside any other thing that's going on just to try and accommodate the best they can. In the cities, it's so diverse and so big. It's tough to do that, and some centers have it, some centers don't. And I do hope in the future that cities, maybe municipalities, can partner with local First Nations and Métis to make a facility like that. But it actually has to be co-driven by the municipalities as well. When it comes to ceremonies, um, indigenous ceremonies are very are you it's a coming of age, and there's a lot of you got to sacrifice years and years and years to become a very respected and carry yourself in that way to be a ceremonial leader. It's a doctor. It takes 8 years for a doctor to be in this country a doctor. It probably takes you 20 years to be a ceremonial leader, because you got to sacrifice so much. And so it's very personal. And just to say a mosque or a church, First Nation ceremonies, they're very not territorial, but kind of respecting one another without crossing those lines. Like, I'll give an example. In Cowes, like, we have one ceremony teepee that does Cree. We have one that does Lakota. We have one that does kind of a Cree Soto. You kind of got to know the protocols for each of them, because they're all unique. And it's not a bad thing, but it's just you got to know the protocols, because it's just a respectable thing. So you can't really have just one in a city, because you're gonna have people not show up because, well, I don't do Lakota, I don't do Cree, I don't do that way. And and we don't want to hinder people. We want them to be welcoming. And so I think you almost need to know your territory of your city, like Edmonton, for example. Very
With the
strong Cree
Cree,
in the south, very
yeah.
Dene in the north. How do you make sure you have those as options? You probably have a lot of Ojibwe from the east side of Canada. Do you need an Ojibwe one? So I think you kind of got to separate the two, but make sure,
Mhm.
if you use the local hub as the place to go to those other places, 100%.
Yeah, and it's great that you say that, because we were speaking to somebody here from this area, and they were talking and saying the same thing, that they will have the ceremonies, but they'll have them in different teepees, and they'll
Mhm.
be for different tribes, or different dates, those type of things, to have the actual building. So that's totally another. And see, that's one of the things that I think is being discussed, is how do we accommodate all the different ways of being. How do we accommodate all that? So, but I do think that it is important for us to have those spaces as indigenous people, for especially for the urban people that can't make it out, to do ceremonies out on the land. So,
Mhm.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
a lot of our brothers and sisters on the streets, they can't make it back home, right? Like, they're living
Yes.
type of life, and just to be able to, maybe get to smudge in an area would be
Mhm.
something that would lead them on the right path. And those are the types of things that we're talking about. Not, I mean, of course, ceremonies as well, but trying to
Yeah.
introduce our people that are struggling back to their culture a little bit, giving them kind of a guiding way, if we could.
Yeah.
100%. Like, one more comment is, if municipalities, and I'm talking cities too, when I say municipality, I mean a mayor and council. You take Edmonton, Calgary, Regina, Saskatoon. Well, just to use those five. If each council can dedicate 2 to 4 acres of land in a very strategic place where transportation can get there, buses and whatnot. And I tell you, just make it big enough for 100 people to gather, a couple breakout rooms. The healing that would happen in each city, and the unity that the nations would come to. Like Cowses, we have 200 people that live in Edmonton in the surrounding area. If I knew the mayor and council were doing that, I would personally call the mayor and say, Cowses First Nation supports you. Do you need a letter of support for the federal government to fund this? Because you're helping Cowses members. Like, it really has to kind of be driven by the municipalities to really drive it. And I know the local nations and supporting nations would support it as well. And if it's this podcast that is going to awaken that, maybe we just need to because it will help. You can have language classes there. You can have smudging at any time. You can have food on cold days. You can prepare maybe a men's hunting group to go out to the north, and that's where they go before, and that's where they bring their whatever they whatever animal they prayed for and they bring back. Maybe that's where you can skin it and teach again. But we need a safe place to do that.
100%. That's amazing. And it's the ideas will just be sparked, as it goes through, and it's just I think it's been a long time coming. And as we say, we're creating these conversations to hopefully start ideas. And even with the men, we have a men's group here that's thrown on by Ben Taro that we had no idea about. And so when that podcast comes out, a lot of men are going to find out about this group that you can join online as well too. You don't have to leave your home if you want to get that help through speaking and having those conversations. So that's exactly what this podcast is about. And I think that having you on here, you're definitely one of the deadly uncles, and we'll be sending you a deadly uncle cap. It's called the Deadly Uncle podcast. So next time we see pictures of you golfing, we want to see this hat.
I would be honored to. And if an auntie asks me where to find a deadly uncle and I wear it, I'm going to direct them back to your website.
Send all the aunties our way. Well, me anyways.
This man's the man.
Well, we're glad you had the time to finally sit down with us, Chief. We're really glad that you had the time to do this, because I think you are a role model for a lot of younger Indigenous men from Cowes and from all over Saskatchewan. And so thank you for your time.
Yeah, and it's like Trent said, it's great to see someone that's in the younger years, giving a breath of fresh air to community, to leadership, and those things, with also following that protocol, which is always important too. But it's really nice to see, somebody that's, in their younger years.
And speaking of aunties, I knew you were okay because my Auntie Belle said she knew you and you're a good guy. So.
When Auntie
Belle Young. She was a librarian at the First Nations University. Yeah. She said she knew you were a student. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Trent. I was going to say, when Auntie Belle's name comes up on my phone, I'm either going to get a praise or I'm going to get heck for something. There's no middle ground.
That sounds about right. I get the same call. It's probably not as serious as a Chiefs call, but she's always ready to tell me to smarten up. That's for sure.
That's the best.
Well, thank you for all you do, and thank you so much for being on the podcast today. You really have made the season 1 special, and we hope to see you in the future here.
Nanaskamun, thank you both, and everybody listening. Hey, one day at a time, we're getting stronger.
Hi.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks again.
Hi. And we'll email you when we're gonna upload the podcast and stuff. I'll give you all the details. We're gonna get it all together in the next couple of weeks, so we'll let you know.
A lot sounds good. A lot of fun. Very professional. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Deadly Uncle Podcast,
a safe space for deadly uncle conversations.